Hi, everyone. Welcome to First Friday Spirit Talk. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Christopher Mitchell. I'll be your host, and we're going to commence with a short section called Chris's Astrocast, where I talk about the current astrological energies, and then we'll get into the main topic for today. So I thought I would paint a picture of just kind of the general energy that's going on right now. There's a couple things going on that add some interesting nuances to our experience at the moment, or rather reflect some interesting nuances of our experience at the moment. Um, and the first thing to mention is that we're in a bit of an interesting pinch right now where we've had a lot of Gemini energy for the last month. And Gemini is a sign that is very busy, very out on the town, very open and curious and taking in lots of stimuli. But there's been a bit of a shift where the sun, which is the big spotlight that of our attention, the sun has shifted into Cancer, which is a more homey and sensitive and emotional space. But Mercury and Venus, other personal planets about how we feel, what we like, and how we communicate and think, they're still hanging out in Gemini. So the sun, there's been this shift where the attention, the energy within ourselves has left behind like the busy night out on the town and is ready to kind of like decompress a little bit and is maybe feeling a little more sensitive. Parts of us might be feeling a little more sensitive and quiet, but there's still this Gemini energy going on too, where Mercury's in Gemini, and every morning we might wake up and our thoughts want to go 8 different directions. Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. And our Cancer sun energy being like, I'm just sensitive. I don't want to feel and think about all these things. So there's kind of a little bit of a tension there where we're being called in one direction, but other parts are still hanging out at the party. But that's going to start shifting soon. Actually, on Monday evening next week, Mercury will move out of Gemini into Cancer, and it will start to line up with that Cancer energy. And our thoughts and the way that our mind is moving will get in harmony with this broader attentional focus place. And then, so that's the broad backdrop of we're shifting into Cancer season, but it's taking a little time for the Gemini planets to catch up and move with the main spotlight of the sun. But then there's also a very significant aspect happening right now, today, tomorrow. It's been building up all week and it'll fade out next week. But we've got something called Mars square Pluto. And Mars is the planet that has to do with our will and our power and our action, right? And Pluto is the planet of shadow work and deep empowerment and peeling back layers. And as these two forces are squaring each other, it's kind of a challenging growth friction. It's Mars in Aries, impetuous, willful, just full of desire, wanting to do everything it wants to do, bumping up against Pluto in Capricorn, which is like this deep, ongoing work of transformation. And so there can be this thing of like parts of us strong and willful and just like ready to own their power. I want to go out. I want to do this. I want to have this. I want to push back against this. I'm going to speak down to this. I'm going to argue with this, right? All this impetuous kind of like fiery Mars energy bumping up against the slower, long 14-year churning transit of Pluto and Capricorn, saying, don't forget about all of this. Like, yes, you're moving fast. Yes, you're feeling free and fiery, but we have to pay attention to all these things too. We have to keep doing this shadow work. We have to keep deconstructing this. We have to keep paying attention to this transformation. So there can just be that motion there as part of us tries to grow and expand forwards. We also have to remember in that fiery, impulsive Mars energy as it moves, we have to remember to also pay attention to all the deep work we've been doing in Capricorn. And that's actually a really good segue into today's topic, because Capricorn has to do, and Pluto in Capricorn has to do with the deconstruction and the transformation of a lot of deeply entrenched systems like government, like religion, like politics, places where things are maybe have maybe built up into a kind of crust that doesn't match the true light hiding underneath. And Pluto in Capricorn is also about that work of deconstructing these ideas of how things like spirituality and community get twisted and formed into shapes that maybe aren't actually serving us. So there can be a space there where we deconstruct these things and then rebuild them in a way that is more harmonious and more empowering for everyone and works better. So that's the Astrocast for June. And now let me introduce you to the rest of our panel, and we'll dive into all of that. And this is First Friday Spirit Talk, by the way, where we get together on the first Friday of every month at noon to discuss different spiritual and metaphysical topics. I should switch those two paragraphs around in future intros. But yeah, I'm here with two of my favorite psychic and spiritual teachers. I got Reverend Ginny Brown on my right and Scout Bartlett in the basement. And you guys want to say hi?
I'm down in my Zoom mom's basement playing video games. I'm just not going to mature.
I'll bring you a grilled cheese in a little bit.
Score. Tomato soup?
Okay.
Cut diagonally, though, please, not square cut.
No crust. I know.
I love that. Here we are on First Friday Spirit Talk, where we get together on
the first Friday.
The first Friday.
To make Scout grilled cheese sandwiches and talk about metaphysics. I think we have a new intro.
Right on. Okay. Getting a little preview of next month's Leo Sun antics, because today the moon is in Leo. So we got our playful attitudes on a little bit here too, even amidst the sensitive Cancer spotlight. But
I did like in your Astrocast that Capricorn has to do what Capricorn has to do.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I think Capricorn is one of those things. I've got five planets in Capricorn, and there is a very step by step up the mountain to the top. And the way gets narrower and narrower as it goes, kind of energy to Capricorn. Which is a path of mastery in a way, that like as you're anyhow. More about the astrological archetypes another time. For today's topic of Spirit Talk, we're diving into this really interesting idea of spirituality as a weapon, and talking about the different ways that love and truth can kind of get twisted and tangled up here in this human realm. So Ginny and Scout, to kick us off here, how is it that spirituality has been so turned against itself in this world, in religion and politics and everything we see? So that's something that is so loving and deeply connected with all of us, that's meant to be unifying, becomes so seemingly divisive in our spheres.
Our hunger for power. Power is dichotomous to love. And power, when there's like a thirst for that, when spirituality has met its power, then to me, man's ego tends to kind of take over that. And that's what we experience with Catholicism, with Catholic Church, with a lot of different religions. But it is a imbalance of what is the power of knowledge, the gift of that space, and how we can raise our consciousness through like delineating that power out, versus someone's desire to hold power over another person or groups of people, and how to wield that to their own desire. So to me, that's the toxicity that we experience, and why spirituality in its purity, can be weaponized like that. Because when you're given a truth, and if you don't have a balance within yourself, it can become really hard to hold all that knowledge and not to misuse power, or not to think that you are some source of that information. And so we see people get fused with the ego gets fused with with the concept that that is coming from them in general, when it's not coming from a higher source and just being delivered to you. You're just a steward of that information, but sometimes it just can become so toxic in your space because you identify as being something special because of it.
I'm going to lead off with a disclaimer. The views that I will express are my views. They do not necessarily represent or reflect the views of Ginny or Chris or the Corporation Zoom or God Almighty, whatever that might be. And that's a real key part. I happen to do a thing at the end of each year, and every now and then it happens at other times, where I go into a deep trance state and very selectively, I do not recommend you try this at home, allow other entities to have the platform of using my body as their antenna to broadcast out into the physical world. And so I get to be merged with those higher perspective entities, and I get to hear what they have to say to us here. And I notice every now and then I'll fall back to that. Well, guidance says, as if that gives more credence or more credibility to what I'm about to say, and as if therefore it should override anybody else's thought process or anybody else's disagreement. Now, in this particular case, of course, I am absolutely right, and my guidance is brilliant, and they're absolutely right too, and everybody should swear-wordingly just agree. And I'm really delicate and careful about that. There was a fun thing 100 years ago, before most of y'all were even savvy. The devil made me do it. The devil made me do it. But Jeannie and I were laughing about that earlier, because far more damaging than the devil made me do it has been God told me this is the deal. God told me that this is the truth through me that everyone should swear-wordingly agree with. Apparently, this is a hot topic for me. I'm going to have a hard time not using swear wording. And that's so fabulously frustrating. I mean, Chris even led off with that spirituality is about unifying and blending and joining. And I'll have to add, in some belief systems, spirituality is about unification and joining. But at the same time, spirituality is about banging our heads together so that we can work through, in my view, so that we can work through the stuff that keeps us from being unified and joining. There's an individual that would like to make himself the dictator for life, and seems to think he has, but we'll see, that decided that his position as dictator for life was getting a little tenuous. And so his best thing to do was to go, oh my God, I'm going to have a hard time today. That was going to be a very graphic physical example. So we will say, demonstrate that his hands are not small, and waggle his hands around by, that was still crude, wasn't it? Sorry. But by going and showing that he could send kids and big trucks into somebody else's country and lay claim, and nobody could do a thing about it. Therefore, he has demonstrated his almighty power, and nobody should challenge him. Fear. When I look at it, anger, when I take anger apart, underneath anger, I find fear. But when I take power drive apart, underneath power drive, I find fear. I need enough power so that nobody can challenge what I want, so that I don't have to be afraid of being challenged. I either need to show that I've got 10,000 members in my church, or I've got 100,000 members in my neighborhood militia, or I've got 200,000 people on my or I've got 1 million people on my TikTok following. So therefore I'm safe. The funniest part of that whole thought, and sorry, I'm rambling, but the funniest part of that whole thought is we are safe. This is where bodies were designed to function. You know, if we go into space, we wear a spacesuit. If we go way down in the bottom of the ocean, we wear a deep sea diving suit. If we come put a spirit on Earth, we wear an Earth suit. You know, If there are spirits on Mars in some three-dimensional physical reality, they're wearing Mars suits. If there's spirits in the middle of the that we experience as our sun, they're wearing, I guess that'd be sun suits, wouldn't it? Well, that just went sideways. It is safe here, the same way that it's safe for the greenery of a tulip, even though the greenery of a tulip sprouts a flower that withers and dies, and then the greenery withers and dies away, because it's actually about the bulb. It's actually about the spirit. It is safe here. Meanwhile, it's a wild game we play trying to establish our safety. So, Chris, that leads to whatever your next question is.
Kind of a synthesis of different ones brewing up here in this host head. I've been trying to think of the ways that this works, like thinking of examples of these power and fear dynamics. And what comes to mind for me is like an ancient priest or something who, through some rite or ritual or privilege of study, is able to start to tap into spiritual understanding, and that somewhere in there, as they gain touch with that, it goes sideways into this power dynamic, into this, oh, okay, I have it, and now I'm going to keep the others from it so that I can be in power, or I'm going to water it down so that they're reliant on me, or something like that.
I'm right and the mayor's wrong, so I'll be the word of God saying that the mayor's going the wrong direction, because I want to run the town, but I don't want to be in the election.
Mm-hmm.
Thousands of years ago, there wasn't, we didn't all have the privilege of understanding written language. That, there was a lot more worker bees than there were queen and king bees. And so, that we all played very specific roles in order to survive. So some of that is by design. And yes, power became an issue inside, different dynasties and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, when times were simpler, we had to divide and conquer in order to kind of maintain life. You had to just be a farmer. You had to just be a priest. You had to just be, a governor. So it was our roles things weren't as blended. But as we've become more and more conscious and capable, really, and evolved, we're able to take in more of the information on our own. And so as, we're kind of coming in to the end of the Piscean age, which is all about spirituality and all about these different power dynamics.
It's sort of like declaring the end of my birthday month. I hate that.
Birthday, 12,000 years. 2,000.
2,500.
I'm still not ready for it to be over. Sorry, for the rest of y'all, that's because I'm Pisces and they know it.
Mm-hmm.
As we are coming into this space where we all are more on an even playing field, on an intellectual level, we don't need a priest. There's nothing that stands, I have no greater source of spiritual information than a 2-year-old or anyone else on this planet. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter age, doesn't matter experience, doesn't matter investment, doesn't matter at all. We're just focused on these other things. But the church would have you believe something else, that it's passed down through rites, or that you have to be in some kind of restriction, or, make vows, or it's special in some way. It's not special at all. That's what Christ's message to this planet was altogether, is that the kingdom of God is within you. Like it is not dictated by a priest. It is not dictated by anything else, by the statue, by your offering. You have an individual connection, and that is your birthright. That is your soul's birthright. So, and that's a tremendous gift in and of itself, but it's also, something that Christian churches have been trying to kind of like Pandora's box, get those things back in the box and lock it down and say, no, come to me as your moral guidance system, and that's where things get really toxic, where, the principle of, we've been given very basic rules from God about how this place works. We have cosmic law, and we have a general moral, very broad commandments or rules of life that have been given to us. Everything else outside, especially outside of cosmic law, is up to your own moral compass. But because of what Scout was talking about around how fear drives power dynamics, we seek out like a roadmap to this place of like how to do it right, like how to like use our free will properly versus looking within. We hand that power over to somebody else and say, well, is it wrong if I kill a cow for food? Or is it wrong if someone attacks me and I kill them? Or is it really wrong if I do this? And so man or the priest or whomever starts to define that morality, define what is right, what is wrong. And that's where we lose sight of our own moral development and what we're here karmically to understand, because we're at that point kind of signing up for what someone else's belief system says. And those things are completely individual.
This is a piece I was wanting to understand was how the fear comes in as people move closer to spirituality, which I would think would help clear out and release from fear, that somehow there is still some underlying fear there that grips in and takes it in these power dynamic directions. And it sounds like there's something in there where people who haven't completely processed and felt into and addressed that underlying energy of that fear start to get an idea of what is safe, of what is right and wrong. They start to latch on to an idea of spirituality, and then out of that fear, assert it as a power. Okay, this thing is safe, so we'll make everyone do this thing, or I'll make the world this way. But
so there's a couple side elements I want to jump in on real quick. Sorry to interrupt your lecture, Chris. One, the fabulous book I read recently, I believe the title is Your Brain on Parasites, but it could be This Is Your Brain on Parasites. If you go after Your Brain on Parasites, you'll find it. And the book brought forward a really interesting piece, which was, what if wheat, the grain, domesticated humans, as opposed to it being that humans domesticated wheat? And then their point being that before people started cultivating, in particular grains, in particular wheat, they were all hunter-gatherers, and there weren't a lot of territorial disputes. You didn't have to fight over a territory very much. Everybody sort of roamed. But as they developed agriculture, then they had to develop the ability to stabilize the land for agriculture, and then from that you get kings who demonstrate that they can get enough people to fight for everybody to stabilize the land. So the farmers need the kings, so the kings can have soldiers, so the soldiers can defend the land, so the land can grow wheat or grains. Just a fun thought process. I really like to look at a part of this. I have a friend who, now, my mom taught me to cook, and I'm a good cook. But I am a cookbook cook. In fact, she taught me to cook like a scientist. Every measurement was leveled off on the spoon. Every liquid measurement was viewed through a clear cup. I cooked like a scientist because my mom was more of a baker. And it turns out as a baker, you have to more science it. Now, I have a very dear friend that I visit with, she and her husband frequently, and she is a natural cook. So I actually have witnessed, we went to a restaurant and had a phenomenal dessert. And I watched her over the course of, 6-8 months, take that dessert apart in her head and try different theories of how it might work until she actually replicated and possibly even improved on the dessert we'd had at this amazingly fabulous restaurant. I'm a cookbook cook. I read recipes. She's a natural cook. She reads cookbooks to gain the overview and the theory. I've observed that in the area of spirituality, I'm a natural spirituality-ist, whatever that word would be, as are all three of us. I have wandered through multiple belief systems and gone through those belief systems like somebody going through a berry patch, picking all the right berries that fit and that made sense to me and that overlapped. So that rather than follow a recipe, I've got a sense of where it is I'm going. I think originally each town that ended up with a professional God person, usually a God guy, so each town that ended up with their professional God person because lots of times the God guys survived, but the God women did herbs, and then eventually somebody gathered the town and either ran them off into the woods or killed them. My view. But anyway, every town that ended up with a professional God person that everybody turned to, that person the village supported so that the God person would have time to be focused on God, and so that when somebody in the village got out of whack, they got to be brought back again. Out of which we developed cookbooks, until it became that some of the people that felt called to be professional God persons didn't actually have a natural sense of an inner compass of in attunement with or out of attunement with. And so they had to have a cookbook, and then they followed the cookbook, leveled off each recipe, leveled off each spoon, measured everything in a glass cup, as it were. The recipe book said this, I understand this to mean, so we're going to do this in my town. And then they added that to the recipe book. Which, if you've ever had like grandma's recipe that mom made, and then, great grandma's recipe that grandma made and mom made, there's notes all over it about theme and variations, or even what the heck this meant. Grandma said some. I'm guessing some meant a teaspoon and a half. Nope, crossed out. Turns out 2 teaspoons. Nope, crossed out. Turns out don't use that at all. Use this instead. Grandma was off track. And so people that have, all y'all that are here, if you're still in this Zoom cast this far, whether it's in person or on the recording, in which case please click subscribe. But if you're still here, you've got a natural sense of inner compass toward that which is in alignment with spirit and that which for you is not at this time. Might be later, might never be. But people buy the cookbook and then they gather a following and build an agreement so that they've got a position of, wow, I've got enough people following me, nobody could challenge my position. My family will always have food on the table. Or I'll always get to have the nice seat in the restaurant. Or I'll always get preferential treatment. But it's a cookbook. But they quote the cookbook as being the single one only authority, when there's a lot of cookbooks. And there have been a lot of people with amazing clarity to bring in a message to the planet. A joke that I heard Ram Dass tell one time, and he said, of course, Lucifer was an archangel that then took over the physical plane, which then got later defined as being evilness. But it's not, it's just the physical plane. So God and his buddy, the archangel Lucifer, are walking down the street, and God looks down and sees something really, really sparkly and shiny, and God reaches down and picks it up, we're anthropomorphizing, and looks at it and says, a perfect truth. And Lucifer says, here, let me organize that for you. That was my close.
It was the punchline.
That was my punchline.
Well, I don't know, I was expecting to dive into a whole Lucifer thing there. Next, I almost feel like teased a little bit.
Make them come back after the break. That's the plan.
Speaking of, so we're at the midpoint here of First Friday Spirit Talk, where we like to take a 5-minute meditation. Ginny and Scout, do you know whose turn it is this month? Ginny's. So Ginny will lead us in a meditation, and then we'll come back for
arm wrestle for it.
More explorations of this topic.
Oh, excellent. Well, it is a pleasure to guide everyone in a little practice in finding your power today. So let's close our eyes. And together, let's just take a nice big deep breath in. And exhale. And say hello to yourself by saying your full name to yourself a few times. And listen for the way that you answer back. Maybe it's in a voice, a feeling, or a knowing. And I'd like for you to take a deep breath into your solar plexus and say hello to it. This is your power center. It's where you give your energy away, what you put it towards, where you hold it back. And ask yourself, to what do I give away my power? Maybe you see an organization, a person, an advertisement. What makes you question? Your power? And I'd like for you to imagine your energy and call it back. Call it back from that organization, from that government, from that person, from that event. And imagine it filling your chakra at your solar plexus and reclaiming your energy. And ask yourself, what do I want to give my energy to? How is my power best served? Maybe your energy needs to stay with you, churning, running your energy system. Or maybe you feel called to action, to do something. Whatever you experience is right for you. Hold that information. And together, let's take one more deep breath and return to the room that you're in. And welcome back.
Thank you, Ginny.
You're welcome.
I always like a nice slow waking up from the nap energy as I come back from that and into the next questions. I think where I want to go with the conversation next is so we look at the landscape of the world as it is right now. We've got all of these established age of Pisces old, 1,000-year-old religious and cultural models of this built up energy of just people who have taken power and and created these paradigms that we all live within. We live within a bunch of paradigms that are essentially tangled up, twisted up interpretations of spirituality. And how do we start to find our way out of that? And is the situation in which we find ourselves has been done to human, sorry, two questions in one, but has this been done to us with a kind of agency? Does this evoke dark forces and conspiracy and people trying to keep things watered down and disempowered? Or are we all just turned around backwards and 2,000 years down the wrong highway together, and we just need to find our ways back together?
The only way is through. And we are equally light and dark. You have as much matter as you have light. And so the darkness within you is what we're battling. And it's permeating, and it's all around us. And it shapes our individual world that we live in inside this world. And yes, people want to keep, the ego inside yourself wants to keep you from evolving. Its whole survival is dependent on you staying small, on you not trying, on you not connecting, on you not loving, on you not defining your own morality, on you not growing. And the ego destroys itself. It eats itself alive. It causes its own destruction, but that's a whole nother spirit talk. What will guide you is taking this information, taking what has been dictated by whomever, whatever, and finding if it resonates with your truth or with what you feel is right. And that ultimate guidance system is your emotions. It's not the mind. The mind has it can be too expansive in its questioning and can just loop you around. It's only meant to be a sorting machine. Your emotions will tell you what is true. And so to develop an actual deep, high EQ will give you what you need in order to understand what is right and wrong for you and your individual universe. And as we continue to come to these truths, it elevates our collective consciousness. And we begin to operate at a different level altogether. But the emotions, and it's important to know the difference between what feels good and what feels righteous, what feels right, and what is right. Like what creates connection and love among you and other people, understanding and permeates actual positive emotion. It is so important to do that work. And rant.
And it's always good to remember that we actually come into this plane to accomplish a set of, we don't have another word for it in language other than learning or lessons. But that our lessons are the full spectrum of everything we experience in that which is separateness. I am me and you are you, and we are not we and we are not all together. The lessons are that full range. So one of the things that I find really valuable to remember is anything I see going on in another human being, I have that in me. But just like back in, I don't know, the 80s, they had these frequency modulators on their fancy stereo systems, and you'd walk in and you could see that whoever it was that was the geek that owned that particular stereo system, all those little buttons and knobs were tweaked to a little more of this, a little less of that. Maybe they could actually hear it. But, I also have this belief system that maybe people who do wine tasting can actually taste all those things. Yep, good, not good. I'm there. There raspberries? No raspberries, wine. But that we're all here, anything we see in another human being, we've got that in ourselves. It's just that particular dial in our version is dialed down. But it's there. We could do that. Any horrific thing we see a human being do, we could do that. And there's a place where it's important to own the fact that we have that within us, even while we own the fact that our choices don't take us there. But I watch spirituality become weaponized. God told me that you are wrong. And I do find it funny that if the person having, oh, I am just going to be horrible about this for a moment. So all y'all just give me forgiveness. If the person having their particular spiritual hallucination, where God told them personally that anybody that, I don't know, washes their left elbow is evil and should be put to death. God told them. Well, if the person who's having that hallucination, go for your own definitions, has a following, then it's righteous spiritual teaching, and everybody who washes their left elbow gets beat up on by the people in their following. If they don't have a following and they're standing on a street corner and their dissertation doesn't hold really firmly, then they're schizophrenic and they're shunned or they're put away. Or God told me, and then they go blow up a building because God told them to, and then it's like, oh, well, they were the crazy one about what God told them. Anybody that tries to give leverage to their argument based on God says, I mean, the truth is that if you study enough, anybody that claims God says this, you can find other texts where God said something entirely different than that. I've been reading a fair amount from Dr. Elaine Pagels, a biblical scholar. Remarkable stuff, and just not pro or con, just in really understanding the development of the Christian Bible. It's really neat. She's got a great style. But I also noticed that one point in time I was heavily involved in a spiritual community, and I still love and adore and wish that the founder of that community had stayed on the planet. But I was there early enough to be there when the founder was teaching, and then to be there when layer 1 under the founder was teaching, and then to be there as layer 2 started teaching, having been trained by the founder, but also mostly trained by their older brothers and sisters, as it were. Think of a large family with 12 kids, you know? Mom does not raise kids number 10, 11, and 12. The earlier kids raise kids 10, 11, and 12 with some oversight from mom, right? And I got to watch as what I had understood of Paul Larson, I love the man. What I had understood of Paul's teachings gradually become a completely different thing that had way more to do with registration and sales than it had to do with embodying the teachings. And yet, what I watched happen in the organization was people would do horrific things to each other, followed by, oh, yeah. You know, I understand you objecting to that. That's an issue I have, but I'm working on that. Therefore, I'm allowed to do it. My therapist and I are working on that. Therefore, you shouldn't be offended by the fact I just sort of like ripped your whole self out of you. So there's that place too of I know I have that issue, but I'm working on it. God told me. The book of God told me. The cookbook of God told me. And there is that place where some people need a cookbook. I can't cook like my friend can cook. Beating up my metaphor. I need a recipe. She needs an overview of how the science works and creates a recipe, which has freed me up a lot. Now when I'm cooking, it's a whole lot easier to go, yeah, that's about a tablespoon, as opposed to exacting. Some people depend on the cookbook, and that's part of the experience of learning through separateness. Some people can do the same thing that hurts them over and over and over and decide that being in pain is how life works. As opposed to, wow, if every time I stick my hand in the fire it burns, maybe I don't want to stick my hand in the fire anymore. An embarrassing admission, I can't tell you how many times, I'm tall, ovens or not, I can't tell you how many times I have put a scorch mark across the back of my hand, reaching in to grab something, bumping the upper edge of the oven, grabbing something with a potholder, before I finally figured out that's why people use oven mitts. Swear wording A. I get it now, but I burned myself a whole lot of times thinking that I would find a better way to do it. I would reach more carefully. I would remember, blah, blah, blah. We're all in there, and we're all in this school of earth. We're all in this school of earth to study and learn from separateness. So it's interesting to watch as large groups of people are suddenly getting agitated enough to find out that they and their neighbor both agree that this is how it should be, as opposed to everybody thinking that, well, you know, the leaders told us not us to. And suddenly I'm finding that everybody I know agrees us too. And we're reconnecting. It's a part of this transition of this period, but we're going to see the weaponizing of separateness dial up fantastically well if you can watch it rather than get freaked out.
So it doesn't segue perfectly, but there's a question I really
Sorry.
want to. No, you didn't. It's all good.
I messed up his seg, darn it.
No. What I mean to say is that there's a question I want to fit in here that is a little bit of a jump, but it's just so interesting that I want to touch on it before we leave, and then we'll wrap it back around at the end with a lovely ribbon and bow. But something I wanted to explore while we're here on this idea of spirituality getting twisted up and misconstrued is the big, to me, as I look at it, core topic of sexuality that seems to be, in some ways, at the root of a lot of
Oh, good
these
pun.
power dynamics and paradigms. And why is it that this subject in particular is so subject to control and twisting up by the forces of humanity and the ego and the mind? Why is this the linchpin of it all, so to speak? And the source of so much conflict and division within the separation?
Well, when
Fear.
we talk about sexuality, you're really talking about gender, you know, because at the root of you start to distill. And women don't understand man's power and male rights, and men do not understand women's power and women's rights. And when that starts to get, and when I say rights, I mean rites of passage, like the lessons that come in that gendered body when you identify with it, or whichever side you identify with, you will inherit the lessons you identify with. We should do a topic or a spirit talk on gender.
It's on the short list.
Yeah. I think it's a fascinating topic. But sexuality, the Catholic Church is really responsible for a lot of trying to control paganism, really, like with the restriction.
Which, by the way, was not a swear word. It was just the label that the church put on the people that weren't of that church.
Right. And oddly enough, Catholicism means to unify. It means all religions under one. It was meant in its original design to be an all-inclusive religion. But then power man got involved. And when man gets involved, not the gender man, but us as mankind gets involved, so does ego and power dynamics. And so gender, when we look at, there's this book in the 80s, Scout, you'll probably remember this one, but Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. Remember this book? And it was talking about how we're from separate planets and how we operate is completely different. And it was trying to highlight what these differences are. But you know what we do with something that we're afraid of or that's unknown to us? We try to overpower it. And that's what we see happening in our political system right now in the United States, 100%, is the fear of what is unknown, the fear of power, that a woman has power, so that needs to be controlled or put in a box somehow, So, at the core, sexuality is, I was talking to one of my counselors, and she said an orgasm is ultimate surrender. It's the ultimate surrender. It's a surrendering of everything, I think is what she said. And we fear that. We fear letting go. And sex, sexuality, gender, all those things kind of encompass an ultimate power. If you are laying with someone and they can take you out of your body or have you totally surrender, it's a terrifying prospect.
And if I'm leading a group of men, and it turns out that if I allow them to have wives, and if their wives have a voice, well, if I allow each, whatever, and their wives have a voice, and the wife's voice is different than my voice, the wife's voice could overpower my voice. So I need to make sure that all of the men in my following recognize that the women's voice is not as strong as mine if I'm going to maintain my power, if I'm going to maintain my level of that. John's book was an amazing breakthrough because truly neurotypical men and neurotypical women, to whatever degree typical is defined, do process differently. Done a lot of study on that. And it's a really key element. But I think a whole lot of for me to have a following, I need to have an us. And for me to have a following, I need to have an us that's different than the them. So I need a them. Whether my them is genderized, whether my them is skin tone wise, whether my them is belief system, whether my them is whatever it is, I need to have a them for me to have an us to be able to build a leadership for us. I want to touch on Rachel's question real quick in the chat. My view of how to avoid getting lost in the mess and having my brain take over and put me in a state of freak out is to have, for me, a day. Well, initially I thought it was to have a daily practice. And in my daily practice, it's my meditation, whatever yours is, whether it's gardening, crocheting, needle pointing, chatting with your underground needlepoint gang. But a daily practice that brings me back to my center and refeeds my energy batteries. At first, I thought it was a daily practice because then I'm no more than 24 hours away from having come back to center at any moment in time, well, plus or minus. Along the way, I've kind of found that my practice has evolved into every time I notice I go out of whack or run out of whack and I need more whack, I jump back into that vertical beam. We've taught it in a number of the shows. On my website, I have radio shows that are there, and it's at the half-hour point of every one of those shows. Same format. But I come back to my own sense of spiritual connectedness every time I'm waiting, every time I notice that every time I come back off of my pushed buttons enough to notice something has pushed my buttons. Lately, every time any event in international interactions between people has made me sad. So between waiting, disturbed, or sad, I'm coming back to my spiritual practice numerous times until it's as easy as any other reflex. It's as easy as the fact that I'm right-handed, and so if I'm going to grab a pen, I reach with my right hand. I don't have to debate that. It's just right there. So for me, it started with never being more than a day away from when I last came back to center, and that built into a greater and greater awareness of when I'm out of center, so that anytime I can notice I'm out of center at all, I come back to that practice as a reflex. Ginny, what do you do to not get into the freaked out state?
I'm actually going to jump in here to provide the last question for the show so we can wrap up here. And I wanted to end by asking that all these things we've talked about, these tendencies of the ego and the mind and the society to go these different ways with fear and power. How can we best check ourselves and this kind of feeds into the conversation that was happening, but how can we best check ourselves to avoid those pitfalls and those traps and to practice and move towards true, spirituality? Jenny, you were saying that we're equal parts light and dark, and that we're doing this work within ourselves all of the time. How does that evolve? Will it always be light and dark, or can we get the light more and more and more? How do we sort this all out together in this world,
Well, I think a big part of it is look for where you're seeking permission for something that you want. I think that's where we hand over. We're just, we're looking for something from a dogmatic principle or from a teacher to have what we want. And the more that we've suppressed that, usually that desire, it can become more and more toxic, and that can kind of shove things into the shadow self, into our dark parts. And so, looking at like how you can give yourself permission for the lifestyle, the things that you want without looking for that outside of yourself necessarily. I think that's a big part of it. As far as practice goes, something that's important to me is to always understand and see that choice, that I always have choice, even in the most impossible situation. If you think about Odysseus, In the Odyssey, he's like, he has to sail through this canal, and it's either like a storm on this side or a rock on this side, and a lot of times we get hung up in that limbo right there of, what do I choose? Which is right? Which is wrong? Which is going to destroy my ship? Which isn't? And we get stuck without making a choice. That's hell. That is hell right there. You choose, you commit. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it destroys your ship. You choose. And in that choice, you'll receive more choice if there is more choice to be made. And that nothing, no book, no Bible, no government, nothing decides for you. That's just the yammering of collective consciousness trying to make sense or make this place easy and understandable. It's not. It's dual. This will always be a place. This is a school of duality. So I wouldn't be focused on trying to like make it all light or to become more light. No, understand your darkness. Like develop that EQ to really understand yourself so that you can make conscious choice of what you're doing versus sneaky choices about what you want. There's a huge difference. Is understand your darkness so that you can choose, you make choices that are more aligned with you versus kind of being in a karmic like washing machine, where you're seeking lower vibrational sustenance.
So you don't make it all light, but you get better at choosing the light amidst the buffet consciously.
Exactly.
Okay. Scout, do you want to pitch in at the end here?
Totally agree with that. That there's one, I really want to reinforce that, as near as I can tell, in my point of view, God says, this ain't the only playground. Human bodies ain't the only place that our spirit goes to progress in learning lessons, which I view as untangling energy knots. But this particular playground, is asphalt and has low-hanging monkey bars that you're supposed to play tag among, so every now and then you're going to conk your head. And when you conk your head, the pain is going to make your body go into pain, which will make your body go into protection, which will make your body perhaps go into anger or rage or fear or contrition or all of this other fabulously fun stuff about being the full experience of being embodied in an animal creature that we think of as our body in this particular plane of this particular reality of this particular part of learning system called separateness. Embracing that every bit of you is you, and that every impulse of you is you, and building your ability to be at choice among your impulsing. We'll make that a verb. Building your ability to be at choice among your impulsing, to come back to center and be who you would be, whether it's with your beloved and they just punched your buttons, and what you want to do is have a fight and prove them wrong and demonstrate you're right, and what you really would like to do is come back to your heart and be belovedly to your beloved. Whether it's with your neighborhood election, whether it's with the global world that's just wrong, whether it's with that everybody else is misunderstanding your Christianity, and if they just all get it right, it would all be perfect because, God says. Or, I know I've got that, but I'm working on it, so you shouldn't have hurt feelings. And I exploded and raged and screamed and pounded on things and broke the coffee table, but I'm done now, so everybody should be over it. Coming back to your center and being who you are to interact with your surroundings, your life, your experience, and you, being you, and then allowing you to sort that through, to notice like, wow, I've done that, I burned the back of my hand over and over, didn't like that. Oven mitts don't seem manly, but that's how I'm doing it from here on out. That's what works for me. Just finding you and coming back to you. Sorry, go.
So just put bow ties on them or something that makes it feel more masculine.
Big honking pictures of monster trucks and small sound effects that go. Whir, whir.
Studded leather.
See, even on this topic, we can have an amazing selection.
Even better.
So on the topic of studded leather, I think that's actually where we end up leaving off. So ponder and worship your studded leather thought process.
You can find me at revginnyBrown.com.
Sorry. I think I walked on that, Ginny. Try that again.
Studded and leathered. Scout?
I think I walked on your identification info, Ginny. You ought to do it again.
I'm okay.
I'll cue us up. So thank you for joining us for Spirit Talk. We'll be back next first Friday at noon. My name is Christopher Mitchell. If you want an astrology reading, hit me up at unlimitedastrology@gmail.com. And I'll pass it over to Ginny and Scout to round us out. Ginny is at revginnybrown.com, talks to pets, helps you with relationship issues, is overall pretty cool to hang out with. And Scott Bartlett down here does cool energy work. ifidknownthen.com, available for sessions Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays.
And I do want to tell you all that part of my tithing to the world and the community is I produce a radio show that broadcasts in San Francisco every Monday and Wednesday morning at ODark100. We have way more people that listen to it on the website. It posts up on our website afterwards, and you can listen to it there. We have over 500 hours of teaching about consciousness and awareness. Please go in and help yourself. We'd love to have you do that. And then we'd really like to ask you a favor, which is if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and click subscribe. It's actually, I think it's way over there. But go ahead and click subscribe if you would, please. In fact, if you would gather up your entire underground embroidery gang and get all of your fellow gang members to go ahead and bring up the YouTube of First Friday Spirit Talk, get all your gang members to go in there and click subscribe. We'd love it if they'd listen, but they can click subscribe even before they listen. We'd love to have them all join in. And then as a group, we'd like to ask you all two favors. Treat yourself as a loved one, because you truly are. And then my own personal, which is, no matter where on earth you are, you can recognize it's a perfect day to have a great day on purpose. First Friday Spirit Talk every month, even if it's a holiday weekend. Love you guys. Bye.